Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. My name is Peter Lam, and I am the co-chair of IDDSI. On behalf of the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, I would like to welcome you to our webinar titled An International Perspective on Itsy Implementation and Clinical Practice, sponsored by our foundational platinum sponsor, Nestlé Health Science. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the IDDSI website and through Nestlé Health Science. All attendees will be in a listen-only mode, which means that panelists will hear you or see you, and your microphone and video will remain off for the duration of the webinar. However, if you have any questions, you can submit them throughout the presentations using the Q&A function on the menu bar. The panelists will address these questions at the end of the presentations when we invite audience conversation and questions. IDDSI does not currently offer continuing education or professional development credits, but in the upcoming days, a certificate of attendance will be emailed to anyone attending the session virtually on an electronic device. If you are joining us only on the telephone, please email us at meetings@iddsi.org to let us know who you are so that we can email you a certificate. We would like to say a big thank you to all of the IDDSI sponsors. The work of IDDSI and global implementation continue only because of these generous sponsors who graciously provide us with unconditional financial support. These sponsors do not in any way direct or influence the work of IDDSI. So please feel free to let them know how much you appreciate their support the next time you interact with an Itsy sponsor. For those who may not be aware, the idea of the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative was actually conceived in 2012. At that time, a number of countries have published or were in the process of publishing national standards for dysphagia food textures and drinks consistencies. Unfortunately, these standards were using different terms and descriptors, which resulted in increased confusion on an international level. In 2013, the IDDSI committee came together with a goal of developing international standardized terminology and descriptors for dysphagia diets that would meet the needs of individuals with dysphagia for all ages, all care settings, and all cultures. After an exhaustive review of existing standards, available evidence, consultation and collaboration with stakeholder groups worldwide, the IDDSI framework descriptors and the IDDSI testing method documents were published. We are so happy to report that the IDDSI framework, descriptors, and testing methods are now well embraced and being implemented in many countries around the world. Our continued goal is to help foster Itsy implementation globally to improve safety for everyone who is living with dysphagia. We are so privileged today to have an amazing panel of presenters to share their wisdom and insights about Itsy implementation and clinical practice. Please join me in welcoming them to this webinar.
I'm Liz Bowden, and I'm delighted to have been asked to present to you the UK Itsy perspective. For those countries considering adoption of the framework, I'd like to present the journey the UK are undertaking in the hope that you may take some lessons learned from us. I would like to thank the organisations and individuals who have contributed to this presentation: the University of Central Lancashire, the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, the British Dietetic Association, the National Association of Care Catering, the British Specialist Nutrition Association, Oak House Kitchen, and most importantly, Jean Sherrington, an expert patient and carer advocate who herself has had dysphagia and cares for her daughter who also has dysphagia as a result of a stroke. The impetus for our journey was the indomitable Peter Lamb, who assisted us in establishing a group of key stakeholders with Itsy member support, political strategic influencer groups, an interprofessional collaborative, and commercially engaged food industry partners. This consolidated support and the approach gave a focused and actionable plan for the UK. Following expert review and piloting of the framework in various specialist localities, the professional bodies consulted with the wider profession regarding their appetite for change, excuse the pun. We had a high response rate of 98% to our survey, which we thought demonstrated the level of concern within the profession regarding texture modification. As you can see, the survey comments represented a wide range of client groups. We had representation from a wide range of settings, including the healthcare sector, both the acute and community settings, education, and the private and voluntary sectors. We also had representation from a variety of employers, from the NHS, social enterprise, education, and charitable and private providers. And we had representation from across the 4 home nations. We wanted to establish current practice to explore the need and the issues that might be involved with transition to the Itsy framework. Nearly 70% of respondents reported that they use the UK texture descriptors. Some use locally devised descriptors, and astonishingly, some people did not know which descriptors they used. They just relied on giving personal advice about individual foods. Even more concerning was that 63% of people felt that the descriptors they used were not fit for purpose, and that they adapted the guidelines on an individual basis. Establishing that the UK did not have a texture-modified framework that was fit for purpose was the impetus for change. So what advice would the UK give to others considering the adoption of Itsy? The Itsy Aware, Prepare, Adopt strategy over a 2-year period was invaluable. It gave us time to plan and focus our efforts. Engagement of the whole interdisciplinary team of key stakeholders and influencers, from strategic to workforce, was important to achieve whole system change. Government policy requirements for appropriately modified food and drink supported the work further. Industry partners adopted Itsy and ensured product compliance within the specified implementation period and provided training and resources to help healthcare professionals. Freely available information, training and education in accessible formats was developed by the indefatigable Ben Hansen, working alongside clinicians and industry partners. This was invaluable for busy clinicians to disseminate and was immediate checklists and prompt for those preparing and delivering meals. The use of the Itsy audit sheets and testing methods were and are critical in ensuring that Itsy is implemented effectively and that Itsy levels are not just attributed to general types of texture-modified foods. Then the UK embarked on a programme of reassessment of current caseloads across all locations, settings and specialisms. We're not quite at the finishing line yet. There remain some clinical issues and some testing issues. NHS Improvement advised against the use of the word soft, creating some confusion with Itsy Level 6, soft and bite-size. Itsy is still unknown in some surgeries, pharmacies, catering and some care facilities. On the whole, industry labelling is clear. Some thickener products with old labels are still appearing, and some pre-prepared meals are not Itsy compliant. Care home chefs are requesting assistance with recipes and resources and report that the time to modify meals is causing significant stress. Dietitians are concerned about malnutrition because of the lack of Itsy compliant nutritionally modified foods that are available for breakfasts and snacks. And there are issues surrounding dietetic and GP prescribing supplements at level 4. The Advisory Committee on Borderline Substances have previously expressed concern, as half scoops can be highly variable, particularly if the scoop doesn't have half scoop markings. However, to reach some Itsy levels, half scoops are still required. And patients report a lack of information, a lack of education, and a lack of training on Itsy and how to prepare prescribed consistencies. Issues continue around testing methods for the Itsy levels. The UK focus on terminology change has potentially delayed the use of critical Itsy testing methods. Many images show foods in their frozen state as if ready to eat, and very few show the required Itsy testing methods as evidence of compliance. Some individuals that serve food directly to people with dysphagia don't have the level of responsibility to pass or fail a dish, and that decision could result in risk to the individual. There are still isolated pockets of local adaptation of the Itsy framework, and tests are not widely used in practice owing to a variety of reasons. The Itsy reference group formed in January 2021. It is a multidisciplinary group working together to disseminate good practice and assist Itsy implementation. We have 5 working groups, and current work plans are to undertake a survey of current practice, explore possibilities for nutritionally suitable Itsy compliant breakfasts and snacks, and Fiona Gardner is undertaking a feasibility study implementing and coordinating training and systems from kitchen to wards to highlight critical role in service delivery and assign appropriate skills, resources, equipment and contingencies. The results are expected in early 2022. I'd like to finish by thanking you for your time today and to remind you that adopting Itsy may have some challenges, as the UK has certainly experienced, but by global adoption of the framework, you are making the world a safer and more enjoyable place for people with eating and drinking difficulties. Thank you.
Good morning or good evening from wherever you are watching this webinar. It's my pleasure to participate in this webinar on behalf of Dysphagia Research Society regarding the Itsy framework. My name is Jackie Allen. I'm the president of the Dysphagia Research Society, and I'm a practicing clinical laryngologist in New Zealand. I acknowledge the assistance of my co-author, Dr. Anna Miles, who has spearheaded the rollout of Itsy in New Zealand. Today I'd like to discuss briefly Itsy rollout at 2 different sites. Brief information about Dysphagia Research Society. We are a multidisciplinary society that developed from research meetings initially organised by Dr. Sonis in 1985 and yearly thereafter until 1991, when several key participants founded the society proper. The following year, in 1992, Dysphagia Research Society held its first official meeting. The society has always been envisioned as multidisciplinary and international, and this remains so until the current day. At present, DRS has more than 800 members worldwide and representing more than 20 countries. We also have a diverse participation across many subspecialties, and this gives rise to an opportunity for collaboration and cross-fertilisation of research strands. We believe that this strengthens the Society's research impact and also research opportunities. DRS has a mission to disseminate knowledge about dysphagia and to improve dysphagia research globally. Our strategic plan outlines our key goals. These include fostering education and mentorship of developing researchers. It also targets improving quality of dysphagia research worldwide. We believe that the Itsy framework provides an opportunity to improve dysphagia research with its vital common terminology that can be used by clinicians, researchers, and industry so that we are all talking the same language when it comes to our patients. Many DRS members have been intimately involved in the development of the Itsy framework and indeed its global rollout. Therefore, DRS supports the Itsy framework as an aid to research and as a benchmark for dietary standardization globally. In the USA, the rollout of Itsy can be well detailed by my colleagues who are participating in this webinar from Asha and. Therefore, I will not talk more about the American implementation of this framework, except to say thank you to my colleague Luis Riquelme, who provided this information for the slide. Instead, I'd like to transport you to the south, to New Zealand. Currently onshore, we have about a population of 5 million. Most of us live in urban settings. We run a nationalised health service with around 40 public hospitals nationwide. 35,000 people live in residential care. And across the nation, we have around 900 speech-language therapists, 1,000 dietitians, and around 100 ORL surgeons. New Zealand currently has 2 companies producing specialised, texturised or modified foods, but we also import many agents and modified foods from abroad. At the time of Itsy implementation for New Zealand, key stakeholders were called together to brainstorm the best possible manner in which we could undertake the rollout. This included our New Zealand Speech Language Therapists Association, the New Zealand Dietetics Foundation, and governmental representatives. 5 key areas were identified to assist with adoption of the Itsy framework. This included education of the clinicians on the ground, primarily speech-language pathologists and dietitians. It also involved education and mentorship for the food producers and food provider services. Furthermore, this was coupled to a public awareness campaign and to key integration with government policies and initiatives to help strengthen the Itsy space. Some of the avenues that we chose to disseminate the knowledge are listed here. This included radio broadcasts and newsletters that were sent out on a regular basis for the first 2 years of implementation. There is a nationwide health bulletin that is circulated to all public hospitals and healthcare facilities, and the Itsy framework was published regularly with education given in this space. We also contacted our largest commercial food producer, BID Foods, and have worked closely with them to provide internal education to their company, as well as to develop the appropriate food textures. In terms of clinical dissemination, primarily the nationwide organisations were used in conferences for dietitians, speech pathologists, and in aged care. We also involved our food scientists to help them assist with food technology and preparation. At the outset of Itsy implementation, a research audit was undertaken in aged care facilities to examine current diets available. About 1/3 of residential care adults were receiving a texture-modified diet, whether that was puree, minced and moist, or soft and bite-sized. All residential care facilities offered a puree diet, but only 1/3 offered moist and minced, and about 70% offered the soft or bite-sized. Portion sizes of the meals were varied and were not fully compliant with standards across all diet types, especially the protein and carbohydrate portions, which were particularly underweight. Among texture-modified meals, the meals of pureed diet were the most compliant, with less compliance for soft and bite-sized and for minced and moist diets. We were fortunate to gain the support of our food producers who changed their labelling to reflect the Itsy criteria. This was a big success, but did not come without considerable work. Changing labels represented a large cost to the food producers, and we're very grateful for their belief in our ultimate goal of patient safety as we negotiated timelines to support their businesses. Our largest commercial food distributor, BID Foods, agreed to add the particle size of their products to their website to help food service providers choose the correct product and particle size. Other strategies that led to successes were regular stakeholder meetings with consultation, regular newsletters where those who'd made changes were named and added to a regularly circulated list of Itsy compliant workplaces and companies. We also allocated champions, a speech pathologist or dietitian, to support the companies and gain buy-in from their food service providers. This mixture of support, engagement and peer pressure certainly helped to encourage companies to be compliant. Now all food products in New Zealand are labelled with Itsy appropriate levels. Food service providers were also supported by speech and dietitians to help develop policy and to change their menus. Staff in the kitchens and those that were feeding clients were also educated on the Itsy diet levels. A New Zealand menu audit tool was used across aged care facilities to help revise diets to match the Itsy framework. The education of chefs has also been a key area of focus. In 2018, we trialled an e-learning chef training with all head chefs across one of our largest aged care providers. We were then able to develop this tool further into an online e-learning module. This has now received New Zealand Qualifications Authority approval and has been launched as an online learning module. Chefs can complete the online module and then they are tested in their workplace for Itsy competence and are signed off as certified. Our goal is to have at least one chef in each facility Itsy certified. The combination of varied approaches that we have trialled has allowed us to implement nationwide the Itsy framework. This is now instituted in our care facilities. We believe this has been a gold standard rollout across time. I'm now happy to take questions or hand over to my colleagues for their expertise. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, everyone. First, I just want to thank both Peter Lamb and Nestle for inviting me to speak on today's webinar. My name is Nikki Barrett, and I am a registered dietitian and senior manager of learning initiatives at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Part of my role at the Academy is to help advance Itsy efforts across the United States and territories, so I'm very excited to participate in today's event. Just a quick disclosure that neither I nor the Academy received any funding for our participation in today's webinar. So I thought it would be really nice to start off the presentation by going back in time. What you see here is a very condensed version of the Academy's relationship with Itsy over the past several years. It's been an incredible journey, and it's amazing to see how far we have come. After the Academy's Evidence-Based Practice Committee reviewed Itsy's 2015 article, The Influence of Food Texture and Liquid Consistency Modification on Swallowing Physiology and Function, they determined that the methodology was sound, and the Academy leaders voted to support the adoption of Itsy in October of 2016. At the 2017 Food Nutrition Conference and Expo, the Academy featured its first Itsy educational session on United States global readiness of Itsy implementation. This session sparked excitement among our members as they looked towards Itsy as the future for dysphagia management. Shortly after that 2017 conference, our nutrition care manual and diet manual were both updated to include Itsy terminology and materials. We can fast forward just a bit to our 2018 annual conference, which was in Washington, D.C. We utilized the largest gathering of registered dietitians to once again stir up excitement about Itsy. Peter Lamb and Janice Dubenstein were both present on the expo floor to answer all of our member questions on everything Itsy. It was at this time that the Academy and ASHA together announced that the official launch date for Itsy implementation in the United States would be May of 2019. The Academy created fun signage and encouraged members to share the announcement all over their social media channels. The remainder of 2018 and into 2019 was spent educating our members through virtual efforts such as webinars, newsletters, and an email campaign I will talk about on the next slide. I also want to acknowledge our dietetic practice groups, which are professional interest groups who wish to connect with other members within the same area of practice. These groups have been putting out amazing Itsy education for their members, most of which is approved for continuing education for both registered dietitians and NDTRs. At our 2019 annual conference in Philadelphia, the Academy featured both a hands-on Itsy workshop and an Itsy educational session titled Collaborating for Consistency, Best Practices for Implementing the Itsy Framework. Both received extremely positive feedback from attendees. And finally, and most importantly, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics announced that as of October 2021, Itsy will be the only textured modified diet recognized by our nutrition care manual. The National Dysphagia Diet and associated resources will no longer be included in the nutrition care manual past October of this year. This is a long-awaited announcement from all Itsy stakeholders, and we are hoping this will give practitioners that extra push to begin implementation in their facilities. So I previously mentioned a little bit about our email campaign. So one of the initiatives we worked on was called the Itsy Bootcamp. This was an automated email campaign which provided subscribers concrete tasks and timelines to guide implementation in their facilities. The suggested tasks featured in each email would reference the implementation guides that are found on itsy.org. Each email also featured a question and answer section where we would take a deep dive into questions we knew to be top of mind for practitioners. This program ran from February to November of 2019, and we had just about 2,900 subscribers. We did not restrict access to only Academy members. A registration link was posted to both the Itsy website and featured in several issues of the eBite. And because of this, we saw multidisciplinary participation in the program, which is always a great plus. Now, I know I've mentioned the Academy's Nutrition Care Manual quite a few times already, but I just want to take a minute to showcase the great resources found here. For those of you unfamiliar with the Nutrition Care Manual Diet Manual, it's a communication tool that assists RDNs and NDTRs to provide menu choices that are consistent and accurate with regard to optimal nutrition care. So as I mentioned previously, back in 2017 was when our team decided that it was time to integrate Itsy terminology into both the dysphagia section, clinical recommendations, and the diet manual. So those were all updated in 2017 to include all Itsy terminology and materials. And our nutrition care manual team does a fantastic job at ensuring these resources are up to date and align with all the information found on itsy.org. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about our reference group. So back in November of 2020, the United States and Territories Itsy Reference Group, also known as USTIRG, was formed. So the USTIRG consists of a multidisciplinary group of professionals who have committed to help guide, facilitate, and support implementation of Itsy across the entire United States. This group of volunteers is split into several different work teams, and they do an amazing job guiding implementation efforts across all areas of practice. Some of the work teams include things like education and training, resource collection and development, data collection, research. They're doing tons of great work. So I encourage you all to visit the United States section of the Itsy website to check out the wide array of resources these passionate group of volunteers has put together. And then lastly, I just want to say what an absolute pleasure it has been getting to work so closely with Peter and some of the other Itsy board members over the past few years. The passion that they show in their work with Itsy each and every day is truly something I continue to admire. And I'm really looking forward to all the great work being done to help us achieve Itsy implementation on a global scale. Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome to this portion of today's webinar, Itsy Harmonizing the World. My name is Rebecca Politis and I am a speech language pathologist here representing the American Speech Language and Hearing Association, which I will refer to as ASHA from here on. I am an Associate Director of Healthcare Services at ASHA's National Office, and I am honored today to represent our association on this panel of experts from around the world in talking about supporting speech language pathologists with Itsy implementation and practice. I would first like to thank Peter Lamb and Nestle for this opportunity to speak today. I also would like to disclose that neither I nor the association received any funding by my participation in this panel presentation. First, to give you a little bit of background on ASHA. So the American Speech Language and Hearing Association is the national professional scientific and credentialing association for both speech language pathologists and audiologists in the United States of America. We currently have about 218,000 members. And at the end of 2020, there were, again, over 200,000 members in total, with 181,000 of those being speech language pathologists. Now, out of that 181,000, about 40% of those speech language pathologists work in healthcare settings across the nation, and that can be across the continuum of care, from the NICU all the way through hospice care and end-of-life care. And also that can be hospitals, residential or non-residential, home health care, acute care, post-acute care, and really all along the spectrum. And so that brings us to about 72,000 practitioners who could potentially be in a workplace setting in which Itsy is currently being used, is hopefully in the future being used, or that our members really need information for how to advocate to use Itsy in their workplace with the ultimate goal, all of keeping patients and their families safe and with better quality of care. So a little bit of a timeline of our support of Itsy. The board of directors for our association passed a resolution to support the Itsy framework in 2016. And that really was the jumpstart for our involvement of creating resources and providing member support for the Itsy framework. Since that time, we have offered, there's been a variety of different educational offerings at our annual convention, and also our Healthcare Connect conference, which last was held in 2019, where we had a really wonderful hands-on workshop that was received very well, where attendees were able to really practice with testing and consistencies and really get a sense of what that could look like in their facilities. And most recently, we had a representative join the United States Territories group in 2020, and really to help represent and advocate for ASHA's interests and member support as we continue to try and push this out in as many facilities as possible, and provide that standardization of practice. One of the most I guess on a daily basis, some of the involvement that ASHA has with Itsy is my team, the healthcare team. We answer member questions via phone and or email on a daily basis. And we get, a handful of questions. Sometimes it can be, tens to 20s of questions per month on Itsy implementation. So a lot of the questions involve, what is ASHA's stance? Is Itsy mandated? And then also resources for implementation. And we often point to the itsy.org website, certainly, but we can also provide talking points and suggestions for getting stakeholder buy-in in their facility, depending on the area of practice that they work in. We have articles that have been published in Itsy, on Itsy in the ASHA Leader, which is our monthly magazine for members, and our peer-reviewed journals, the Perspectives of the Special Interest Groups and American Journal of Speech-Language Pathology. On the next slide, I'll be showing you the specific Itsy page on ASHA's website, but also if you go to ASHA, the main ASHA.org site, and just search in the search box for Itsy, many of these resources come up, including the articles in the different periodicals. And finally, we are here. We're here to help. Our healthcare services team can be reached at healthservices@asha.org. And like I said, we have a specific page on asha.org that is in our healthcare realm regarding Itsy. And there are additional resources on dysphagia diets, and that can be found on our website. I really want to also thank, all of the ASHA members that are part of our working group, who have provided valuable insight to, what their facilities are doing and things that have worked, things that have not, because we ultimately really rely on our members who are doing this work and really advocating for Itsy in their facilities to create our resources and provide the best help that we can to the rest of our membership. So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here and look forward to answering any questions that may come up. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Unfortunately, Dr. Kayashita is unable to join us today. However, he was kind enough to provide us with his presentation for this webinar, and I will do my best to present on his behalf. Dr. Kayashita is the chairman of the 27th Congress of Japanese Society of Dysphagia Rehabilitation, as well as the chairman of the JSDR Swallowing Adjustment Food Committee, which oversees the JSDR dysphagia diet standards. Dr. Kayashita is also a board member of the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative. The Japanese Society of Dysphagia Rehabilitation, JSDR, was established in 1994. The membership of JSDR is well over 15,000 members, and multidisciplinary members consist of physicians, dentists, dental hygienists, speech, language, and hearing therapists, dietitians, nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and other health professionals. Since 2013, the JSDR has been using this standardized texture modified food pyramid. It is a special pyramid that helps to guide clinicians on which texture to start their patients on. Dysphagia clinicians in Japan start at 0J and will help their patients move to level 4 as the person's chewing and swallowing ability improves. This pyramid of progressive textural levels that you see here is actually one of the characteristics eventually incorporated into the IDDSI framework. So one of the unique items that is in the Japanese dysphagia pyramid is actually the Japanese dysphagia training jelly. So let's take a moment to focus on this dysphagia training jelly. It is unlike the characteristics of gelatin or jello that we know in Western cuisines in the fact that it holds together, does not melt easily, and it does not break apart or fracture into particulates. So when it is used, it is administered in a thin piece or slice, as you can see in the image here. And it's intended to actually be swallowed in one mouthful. The idea behind this is that if accidentally aspirated, the jelly would not block the airway. And given that this training jelly has 0 nutrients, means that if it does get aspirated into the lungs, lung damage is minimized. The jelly itself, that thin slice, is placed directly at the fascial pillars by the clinician to help swallow, to elicit the swallow. So no oral phase movement typically is needed by the patient. This allows the patient to practice swallowing while closely supervised. And keep in mind that the texture and placement is critical to help them minimize choking risk. There are 2 videos here demonstrating how easily the jelly test food is actually transported and swallowed versus the pureed food. So as you can see, because of the slippery nature and the shape of the training jelly, it was actually much easier for the jelly to be transported and swallowed. So where is the Japanese jelly classified then in IDDSI? Well, the Japanese jelly is actually classified by IDDSI as a transitional food. The question is, well, why is it there? Well, transitional foods have special textural properties that make them easier for people with chewing and swallowing problems to swallow. As described before, because of the characteristic of the jelly, the fact that it's slippery, the shape that it's sliced in before it's administered, it is one of these foods that can be then considered various sizes because the food texture itself helps to improve safety. So when we put this in the greater context of how do we then map IDDSI to the Japanese pyramid? Well, what you see in the slide here is an approximate mapping, and we would like to especially thank Professor Mari Nakayo for providing this mapping system from the Japanese pyramid to the IDDSI. We take a closer look then at the classification and compare it to the Itsy levels. You'll see there's relatively good mapping of food textures at the higher, less modified levels. So JSDR 2-1 is equivalent to puree and Itsy level 4. JSDR 2-2 and 3 level correspond to Itsy level 5 and 6, and JSDR 4 is equivalent to Itsy level 6. The JSDR swallowing adjusted diet, JSDR 2-1 to 4, is compatible with Itsy. However, as mentioned before, the training jelly, JSDR 0J and 1J, because they're in the form of jelly, typically used only in Japan, and well, they're used pretty widespread in Japan. There are many commercial food products which are jelly-based, and using jelly as a dysphagia rehabilitation and training food is unique to Japan. When evaluated, it is currently determined, as mentioned before, to be equivalent to transitional foods. So in many countries, because the gelling agents that are used are temperature dependent, what has been described as jelly foods and gelatin foods are typically not included in the Itsy framework. So that is another reason why the jelly foods are mapped over to transitional foods in the Itsy framework. When the JSDR dysphagia diet classification was previously compared in terms of liquids, the JSDR mildly thick was found to be equivalent to the Itsy level 1, slightly thick. JSDR's moderately thick is equivalent to Itsy's level 2, mildly thick, and level 3, moderately thick. And JSDR's extremely thick is equivalent to Itsy's level 3, moderately thick, and level 4, extremely thick. With that explanation, inevitably, you can see how this would create significant confusion when trying to compare research findings from Japan compared to research from other parts of the world using IDDSI classification. The Itsy flow test was then used to determine the differences between the liquid thicknesses in the JSDR standards. And initially, when the testing was done, the syringe that was widely available in Japan was used. And as you can see in the illustration here, that syringe was in fact shorter and wider, and therefore actually produced results that were slightly different than what the Itsy flow test has actually designated each of the thickness level. So it is important to point out that in order to conduct the Itsy flow test properly, the BD slip tip syringe model 303-134 or the BD Lurlock syringe 302-995 should be used, as they are the correct shape and size which are available in Japan. Dr. Kayashita announced at the JSDR 2021 Congress that just took place in August of this year that the thickening classification of the JSDR Swallowing Adjusted Food Classification 2021 will now align with the international standards as published by Itsy. The Itsy flow test, the simple measurement method, will now also be adopted to determine drink thickness. We would like to thank the Japanese translation team for helping to translate the IDDSI flow test procedures video with a sample of an image that you see here. This video is now available on the Itsy YouTube channel via the link that you see on the screen. To help dysphagia clinicians in Japan become familiar with Itsy, the detailed definitions and testing methods documents have also been translated into Japanese. These are also available and accessible through the IDDSI website. So we invite everyone who may be using the Japanese language to please have a look. And we again wish to thank the Japanese Itsy translation team for their hard work and contributions. There is now also a Japanese translation of the IDDSI 101 video compiled by the Japanese Itsy translation team led by Professor Nakayo. So a special thank you to Professor Nakayo. The full-length video is now available on the Itsy YouTube channel as well, and you can also find it through the Itsy website. Thank you very much for the updates from Dr. Kayashita. We will now hand the presentation over to the next presenter.
Dear Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me today and for inviting me to be part of this webinar of Itsy, Harmonizing the World. I was asked to talk to you today about the current use of Itsy in Europe, and I will try, as the president of Essd, to give you an overview on the data that we have available. Itsy is used in 17 European countries, spread all over our continent. And Europe has some challenges. It's quite diverse. We have many different healthcare systems and also healthcare insurances, which not always make it easy to implement new instrumental or non-instrumental or even dysphagia tools throughout Europe to harmonize that. We have regions with very variable ratios of healthcare professionals per patient. We see that all over Europe that there is a large variability in terms of having accessibility to instrumental assessment and dysphagia tools, but also that the type of professional that is working in dysphagia care really differs. And for example, in Denmark, dysphagia care is mainly taken off by occupational therapists, whereas in many other countries it's speech therapists. So it makes it a large variation. Also, the education within dysphagia training and these multidisciplinary professions varies a lot as there are academic and non-academic programs. But one of the main differences is, of course, the many different languages that we deal with, many different mother tongues within Europe, although English is a language that has been used and is used across Europe. Itsy has already established translations of their initiative in many different languages. As you can see here, it is translated in German, Dutch, Danish, Greek, Icelandic, Hebrew, Italian, Norwegian. There is a second version in preparation for the Norwegian language. We have Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, and Swedish, and the Polish version is in progress. Itsy implementation is occurring, and it is already to the stage that it has been accepted by many national authorities. For example, by the European National Dysphagia Societies in Belgium, Germany, and Ireland, but also by the European national and regional speech-language societies, such as in Austria, Ireland, and Catalonia. We see that the Occupational Therapy Society of Denmark has supported the Itsy implementation, and also that colleagues from the nutritional and dietetic side of dysphagia with their national societies is also supporting Itsy in Austria, France, Ireland, and Italy. Finally, some national health services are supporting the initiative. And here you can see some examples that are applied in Ireland. The Health Service Executive, the National Health and Social Care Professions, but also organizations and professional bodies for speech-language pathology, dietetics and pharmacy. And finally, in Israel, the Ministry of Health has also approved the program. Formal reference groups are formed and established in Austria, Germany, Greece, Israel, Italy, Norway, and Poland. And in Denmark and Iceland, the Itsy reference group formally is not formalized yet, but there are some local teams active. I would like to highlight the missions of ESSD, which is a non-profit organization. And I like to highlight that to explain to you why I think it is important that we are part of this webinar today. One of the first missions is that we want to promote care, education, and research in swallowing physiology and swallowing disorders. We want to formulate professional standards of practice and guidelines. We want to associate all healthcare professionals that are working in the field of normal and disordered swallowing, and we would like to encourage collaboration with them and provide a forum for the open interchange of ideas and research. And finally, I think we want to encourage clinical and basic research in all areas related to normal and abnormal swallowing. And I think this is important as we want to represent and promote the field of dysphagia to national and international authorities and societies within the EU. In the past, some work has been done on viscosity, and the viscosity labeling system was developed by our former president, Perry Clavé, with the main aim to objectify the relationship between viscosity and swallow safety. Itsy developed at the same time a common language when it was describing viscosities in dysphagia care, with the aim to standardize dysphagia diets using accessible tools. And there we think of low costs and minimal training that is required to use it. I think for the future, I have the message for you today to say that ESSD is open to collaborate in research with Itsy to enlarge the scientific evidence of the role of viscosity in this dysphagia management and care. And we also like to support the evidence-based practice involving many multidisciplinary experts in the field of dysphagia. And here we think not only in the clinical professions such as SLT, OT, medical doctors, physical therapists, but we do like to encourage to collaborate with rheologists, engineering, and experts in psychometry. So I think it is crucial to say that as ESSD, we want to listen and to see and to hear and recognize what the needs are of our members. We want to encourage that and give them support where needed. So I think, therefore, it is important to say that we look forward to collaborate with Itsy in the most constructive way. And I hope to welcome you all on our virtual Congress this year in November. Thank you for listening.
My name's Julie Chikiro, and I'm delighted to be speaking with you today about how to incorporate Itsy into clinical practice. I'm fortunate enough to be co-chair of the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, together with Peter Lamb. We are so fortunate to be working with one set of international standards because it increases our ability to care for people with dysphagia. So much of what we do in research comes from clinical practice, and what it allows us to do then is become consistent to advance the field of dysphagia, and that's going to lead to better quality of life. One of the big things that's different to the national standards and is unique to the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative framework is that we've included measurement techniques, because they unlock an opportunity to engage clinically and they allow us to be consistent for safety. We were strongly encouraged to make sure that these measurement methods were simple, quick, portable, and reliable. We were encouraged to do this by a nurse whose job it was to go to coronial inquiries to hear how people had choked and died. So by using the Itsy measurement methods, we are minimising the need for personal subjective judgment. And because they are simple and quick, while it's possible to perform them at any time, you won't need to test them every time. We find that they're most useful for initial staff training, for auditing, or for when people say, we're not sure whether this is quite right, or we're having a problem with this texture. For industry when they develop and test products, and also for kitchens who are developing and testing products as well. So I'll give you an example. If I had a patient who might be on an Itsy level 4 pureed diet. Now, it might be that I hear from the patient that they're having difficulties, and it's possible that their swallowing function may have deteriorated. Or it might be that there's someone new who's preparing their food, or even that there's a recipe that's been changed, or there's been a change in the produce of food, for example, so for example, different types of potatoes might be a different season, for example. One of the things I guess that's happened through COVID is that we're using our virtual technology a lot more. So even if we're not with the person at the time and we might be using tele-rehabilitation, we can ask our patients to show us the type of food that they're eating and to test it right in front of us to find out whether it's behaving the way it should. Maybe, it could be something as simple as the food that was once warm has cooled off and that's changed the texture. So we can look at this video as an example. So the person has collected some food, there's no gravy on it. My goodness, that looks dry. So they've brought the meat and the potato together and, oh goodness, it's sticking to the spoon as well. So automatically I can see that there are problems there, and by looking at those testing methods and also looking at the rest of the food on the plate, I can give some guidance on how to change things to make it safer for the person. Let's look at other ways that we can incorporate Itsy into clinical practice. And let's start by looking at what you and I might eat for dinner. So I've unashamedly provided you with a very typical, probably a 1960s Australian meal that includes lamb chops with some vegetables there. In fact, I think the only thing we're missing are some mashed potatoes. So what it strikes me here is that in a standard dinner plate, there are a variety of food textures. So we've got level 7 in those pork lamb chops, but in the carrots that are there, they could have been chopped down to something that might be minced and moist. And the steamed broccoli there could be steamed to the point and cut to a point where it's suitable for level soft and bite size, for example. And if we'd included the mashed potato, we would make sure that it's a Itsy level 4 pureed food. So for healthy people, we are used to eating a variety, and I think that's really important that we do that. Itsy is encouraging experimentation with food and presentation as well. So rather than looking at those food textures that are on the left-hand side there, where we've got the traditional ice cream scoops of the green, the white, the orange, and the brown that I don't even want to think about, instead, we can work with our chefs to look at something completely out of the box. So we've got there an Itsy level 4 pureed eggs with some bacon dust. Now, the picture has been taken for presentation purposes, so the bacon dust has not been incorporated fully. But when you would go to eat that, you would make sure that it's been incorporated. The bacon dust is incredible. So you take your bacon, you remove the fat, you put it in an oven on a slow temperature to dry it out, and then you puree it and turn it into a dust. What is incredible about this is that it actually tastes like you are eating bacon. Those kind of innovations are things that Itsy is encouraging. It's also encouraging conversations about the rehabilitation of chewing. So transitional foods offer a bridge back to regular textures, and you'll see transitional foods sitting alongside the pyramid, particularly next to level 5, minced and moist, level 6, soft and bite-sized, and level 7, easy to chew. Now, at the discretion of the clinician, patients can be incorporating these textures alongside the level 5, level 6 and level 7. And it's also not to say that someone who's on level 6 soft and bite-sized couldn't have a plate that also includes level 5 food and level 4 food, so that we've got that beautiful variety of textures there. One of the things that's really important about our transitional foods is that they offer an ability to have a crunch, which is a normal texture, and that there is little chewing strength and stamina needed, which offers that ability to move back towards normal textured foods. So the transitional foods are ones that change with moisture or change with temperature. And this is a picture of a wafer, for example. Whilst talking about chewing is something that's very common in paediatric dysphagia due to normal development of chewing skills, it's probably something that's not really had a large focus with adults who have dysphagia. And so because we have this focus on chewing strength and chewing ability, and that those are tied to the different Itsy levels, what we're seeing now are people being very interested in developing a sequential approach to evaluation and treatment of chewing. Because we don't really have that in the adult space yet, I've brought you an example here from the paediatric space, which is the Carradine Chewing Performance Scale. And through there, we've got some very practical examples of different physiological skills. So, for example, the person starting to chew, but perhaps they can't hold the food in the molar region, or difficulty with transitioning the food into a bolus, where you can see that those physiologic skills lend themselves naturally to trialling different Itsy levels, and the clinicians can work up and down different levels to find a level that works well for that person. Itsy in practice also really helps with working with an interdisciplinary team and also working with family as well. So working within a hospital or with multiple team members who might be working in a group home in the community, if I were to say to them, this person needs an Itsy level 5 minced and moist diet, everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. And they also will know that that means that they should be safe for an Itsy level 4 pureed diet as well. And this is where we can work with clinicians to create foods that offer people variety as well. It's also important that we educate family members. We had a national congress here in Australia earlier this year on food, nutrition and the dining experience in aged care. And that survey brought out that, more than 80% of aged care facilities have a policy that allows families to provide foods to their residents that they've prepared at home. So it's really important that families understand the Itsy framework and the testing method so that they can bring food in that's going to encourage people to eat, cultural food or food that brings back beautiful memories that's also safe for them. I've in fact had family members contact me because they've looked at the Itsy website and they've even been providing education and support to aged care. I also wanted to take the opportunity to share some lessons learnt from our Australian implementation journey. So we adopted Itsy on the 1st of May 2019, having started our journey at the end of 2016. One of the things that we did very early on was created some mapping. So we mapped our Australian standards for foods as well as liquids to the Itsy standards there as well. One of the things I really need to emphasise, though, is that you must use the Itsy testing methods. Because what we found, for example, was that people would go through and test each of their recipes, and they found that they actually had a lot of level 4 pureed and a lot of minced and moist, but they had very few that actually fitted the requirements for soft and bite-sized, and then a larger number that fitted level 7 easy to chew. So it's not a case of just simply taking your menus and diets and putting in the Itsy label on it. Please make sure that you use the Itsy testing methods. And the same is true of the liquids as well, particularly for ones that you are preparing in-house. So the Itsy testing methods are available on beautiful posters that Itsy had developed. These are freely available on the website so that you can download them and print them. We're also working with our translation communities to have them translated into languages other than English. One of the other things that the Itsy framework is, where it differs from the national frameworks that you might be familiar with, is that we've moved away from those foods to include and food to avoid lists. And I can give you a very practical example there. So I had a patient many years ago who was on a level 4 soft and smooth is what it was called then. It would be a level 4 Itsy pureed meal. And I walked in to find an entire banana, and not just any old banana, but a green banana sitting on the plate beside them, which was a choking risk because they needed it to be pureed. When it's provided to them, it needs to be in the right format. So when I inquired as to how it was that an entire banana had ended up on the plate, I was told by the kitchen staff, well, the food to include list said bananas were okay. So we had a big education session there. So this is why the testing methods are important and why it's important that kitchen staff understand that. And this is why we've moved away from those foods to include and food to avoid lists. Itsy has provided us with this one international language, and we have very proudly made sure that our publications are available, open access, and we know they're being accessed, which is fantastic. I also wanted to specifically point out for incorporation into clinical practice the Itsy framework, which was used in the Kempen pilot. So I encourage you to read that one in particular because they did something incredibly novel in this space. So the cooks and chefs in Kempen in Germany worked very closely with the clinicians. So one of the activities that they did, for example, is that the cooks and chefs and the people working in the kitchen hands, watched the food and they followed it from the kitchen along the corridor, up the lift, into the ward. They watched how long it sat there and waited, and they watched it being provided to the people on the wards. So for the very first time, they were seeing the food that they'd prepared given to the person, and they were able to put a face and look at the person as they tried to eat the food rather than seeing just a name on a piece of paper. And that was such an incredibly powerful exercise because they knew and they understood the why of what they were doing with Itsy, that they were creating food that was safe for that person to eat. The clinicians likewise came down into the kitchen and watched to see what a busy environment it was, but also to see the care that was being taken in the food preparation, the testing that went on, the large scale at which food was being prepared, and the care that was being taken by the safety monitors who were removing food that was not safe. This is a fantastic model to follow, so I strongly encourage you to look at that article in particular. The altmetric scores that we see from the article show us that Itsy is being used all over the world, and that's growing every day. We know that it's being used across a range of publications, from pharmacy through to geriatrics and gerontology, through to rehabilitation, nutrition, linguistics, pediatrics. We know it's being cited, which is fantastic, and we can see that growing. It's influencing government policy. It's influencing policy in Germany. It's influencing policy in Australia. We are so excited to see this. It's being used in everyday practice to test infant milk thickness. It's being used to test the viscosity of drinks in Egypt that is allowing clinicians in Egypt to use Itsy testing methods so that when they test using FEAS, for example, that they can compare their results using FEAS to studies that have been conducted in the United States or in Europe, for example. Itsy is being used to test the enteral feed thickness. Did you know that when you've got a feed thickness that's too thick, you can actually blow out the motor of the pump, for example? We can see Itsy being used to test the texture of food in aged care, and we are absolutely delighted to see this. Itsy is also being used for the very first time to measure the thickness of liquid medications. The Society of Hospital Pharmacists of Australia, in the 4th edition, which is currently under construction, will be including this for the first time. I can give you a very practical example as well of how else we're using Itsy to work together to establish practice, because Itsy is a living framework. Level 1 slightly thick. We knew, the community told us, and I'm talking the international community told us, that this level of thickness was needed to be included because it is commonly used for infants who require thickened milk feeds that go through a teat or nipple, for example. And that's used in the infant space. Level 1 slightly thick is also used in the palliative care and cancer care space. Now, it's possible it could be very helpful in other conditions as well. So if we use the Itsy flow test and use a syringe with the same dimensions and testing conditions, we can see if that level 1 slightly thick might be useful in stroke rehabilitation or in dysphagia in dementia that might promote compliance, which therefore allows better hydration. Itsy provides us with one language, which will improve the lives of people with dysphagia. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the presenters for sharing their insights and wisdom with us. Please join me in a round of virtual applause to all of our wonderful presenters. I am now going to ask them to join us for audience conversations and answering questions.